At some point in the late 80s or early 90s, you almost certainly picked up a plastic gun, pointed it at a television, and shot something. Maybe it was a duck, maybe a clay pigeon, maybe it was a cardboard cutout of a gangster. Whatever it was, for a brief window of time, that felt like the future of gaming. And then it just stopped. Light gun games didn't fade slowly. There was no long goodbye. One generation, they were everywhere. The next, they were basically gone from home consoles entirely. Most of us assume we know why, but the real answer is much more interesting than you think. Here's the explanation that usually gets repeated whenever this subject comes up. LCD screens replaced CRT televisions in the mid-2000s. Light gun technology was built around how CRTs work. New screens arrived, guns stopped working, genre died, end of story. And that's not entirely inaccurate. The technical incompatibility is real, and it's actually pretty interesting. We'll get into that a little bit later. But that explanation also has a problem. It points to the screens changing as the moment everything fell apart. Except the light gun was already in serious trouble on home consoles years before anyone owned a flat screen. So either the screens are not the whole story, or something else was quietly going wrong long before the technology caught up with it. Here's some interesting things to consider. The Super Scope launched in 1992 for the Super Nintendo. Flat-screen TVs at that point were an expensive novelty for businesses and early adopters. The average living room had a CRT. The technology worked perfectly fine. And yet the Super Scope failed. Only 11 games ever supported it. Sales stopped by 1997. The N64, which launched in 1996, received exactly 0 light gun games. The GameCube after it, exactly the same. The genre was going cold on home consoles a full decade before LCD was even a problem. Now, here's another point. Sega previewed an official light gun for the Dreamcast US launch in 1999. It was designed for a CRT world that still very much existed, but it never shipped in America. It wasn't because of technology. Sega quietly pulled the peripheral from the US market due to concerns about bad press and gun violence. A third-party manufacturer stepped in with a licensed alternative instead. So parts of the industry were already showing that they were willing to walk away from the light gun, and for reasons that had nothing to do with how screens worked. But this might be the most revealing point of all. When Nintendo launched the Wii in 2006, it solved the screen problem entirely. The Wii Remote used an infrared sensor bar and worked on any modern TV. In terms of accuracy and compatibility, it was arguably a better light gun than most of what had come before it. And publishers responded. The Wii actually got more light gun style games than any other home console ever released. And yet, the genre still did not break through. That's a pretty clear indication that the LCD did not break the light gun. Publishers showed up when the technology allowed it. The genre still could not find its footing. There was actually much more compelling clues as to why the light gun was fading out. There were 3 things that went wrong. Number 1, the genre was built for arcades, not the living room. The golden era of light gun gaming happened in the arcade. Lethal Enforcers, Virtua Cop, Time Crisis. These were not designed by studios thinking about what you would want to play at home on a Saturday afternoon. They were built for arcade operators who needed to make money from every square foot of their floor space. The logic was, make the game exciting enough that when you die, and you will die quickly, you put in another coin and try again. Short sessions, high spectacle, maximum engagement. If you've seen any of my other videos on arcade economics, you know how this works. Arcade games were not primarily designed to be fun to own. They were designed to be worth paying for over and over, 3 minutes at a time. That doesn't usually translate well when you bring a game home. The home versions of these titles were often great, but shallow. So the steady flow of new light gun experiences was driven by arcades buying new cabinets. And once arcades started declining in the late 90s, that flow of new content slowed to almost nothing. Without new games coming through, there was less and less reason to bother with the light gun at home. Now here's the second thing that went wrong that reframes the whole history. Nintendo didn't stumble into the light gun with Duck Hunt. Their history with the technology goes all the way back to 1973, before video games were even a business for them. Gunpei Yokoi, the engineer who would later give us the Game Boy, built the laser clay shooting system, a light gun shooting range installed in abandoned bowling alleys across Japan. It nearly bankrupted the company when the 1973 oil crisis wiped out the business model. But Nintendo kept running with it regardless, scaling down into arcade cabinets through the late 1970s. So by the time the Zapper shipped with the NES in 1985, Nintendo had over a decade of experience with light gun technology. They knew exactly what they were doing with it, which makes what they actually did even more interesting. You likely know that Super Mario Bros. Was the best-selling NES game of all time. Do you know what number 2 was? Maybe you're thinking Mario 2, Mario 3, maybe Zelda. No, it was Duck Hunt, with approximately 28 million copies. Now that happened almost entirely because it came bundled with the NES. So that number sounds like proof of massive demand for light gun games. It wasn't. Because here's the thing. When Nintendo brought the NES to North America in 1985, they had a real problem. The video game crash of 1983 had destroyed consumer confidence. Retailers did not want to stock game consoles. Toy stores especially wanted nothing to do with anything that looked like a video game machine. Nintendo's answer was to make the NES not look like a video game console. The hardware was redesigned to resemble consumer electronics, an entertainment system. And the launch bundles were built around peripherals, Rob the Robot, and the Zapper. That made the whole package look more like an advanced electronic toy than a gaming machine. Nintendo's marketing director Gail Tilden described the approach directly. The goal was to get the NES into toy store aisles by presenting it as a futuristic toy. Rob and the Zapper were part of that pitch. So the Zapper was not a long-term investment in light gun gaming as a genre. It was a Trojan horse for getting the console into stores. Once the NES was established, that was that. The light gun had done its job. Now here's the third thing that went wrong with light gun games. Nobody really ever actually committed to building them. And this is the trap the genre kept falling into. If the company making the console does not seriously invest in keeping games coming for a peripheral, like a light gun, game studios will not build for it. If game studios do not build for it, people will not buy the peripheral. If people do not buy the peripheral, the console maker has no reason to invest. This is a cycle that goes round and round. The Super Scope made it clear as early as 1992. Nintendo released it, supported it with a bundled game, and then Konami, at the time one of the biggest names in arcade shooting games, looked at the Super Scope and decided not to support it for their port of Lethal Enforcers. They released their own peripheral instead, the Justifier, which was incompatible with the Super Scope. Now you had two different light guns on the same console, neither with enough games to justify, no pun intended, buying either one. Game studios had to pick one to support, knowing most players would not have it. Players had no reason to buy it. The whole thing went nowhere. Even Namco, who invested more seriously in the home light gun than almost anyone else with the GunCon on PlayStation, eventually stopped. The GunCon shipped alongside Time Crisis in 1997. The GunCon 2 came with Time Crisis 2 on PS2. Then the releases slowed, the support dried up, and the same cycle that had killed every previous light gun peripheral repeated itself. Every generation, a new light gun would appear, get a handful of games, and quietly disappear. No one ever committed long enough to build a library worth having. Not even the companies that tried the hardest. By the mid-2000s, everything hit at once. LCD televisions crossed into mainstream use. CRT sets had accounted for around 75% of TV shipments in North America by 2004. By 2007, LCD had overtaken CRT worldwide. And this is the moment where that technical explanation is worth understanding, because it's real, it's genuinely interesting, and it tells you something about why no one seriously tried to fix it. A CRT television does not light up all at once. It draws the picture by sweeping a beam across the screen line by line many times per second. The sensor inside the light gun detects that sweeping beam, and the console uses the timing to calculate exactly where you are pointing. An LCD screen does not sweep anything. It refreshes every pixel at the same time. There's no beam to detect. The gun has nothing to lock onto. It is a real incompatibility, not a software problem, not something you patch. The gun was built for one specific type of screen, and that screen stopped being what people owned. But here's the thing. This arrived as the finishing blow on a genre that had already spent 15 years failing to build a sustainable home market. By the time the screens changed, the industry had long since stopped trying. The LCD transition did not cause the death. It just closed the door on any chance of recovery. Now go back to the Wii, because it's the most captivating ending to this story. Publishers showed up, they made games, the technology worked, and the genre still could not find an audience large enough to sustain it. The casual Wii audience was not the light gun audience. The dedicated gaming audience was elsewhere, and by that point, there was no arcade scene feeding new ideas into the genre, no established home library for new players to grow up with, and no console maker treating the format as something worth protecting. The Wii didn't prove that the screen problem was the issue. It proved that solving the screen problem wasn't enough, because that had never really been the issue. The light gun's story, useful for selling a new console, given some support, left behind when inconvenient, blamed on technology in the end. That story is not unique to the light gun. Rob the Robot disappeared the moment the NES was established. The Super Scope got 11 games. The Dreamcast gun was canceled before it reached American shelves. The Kinect went from mandatory with every Xbox to quietly optional to discontinued. The PlayStation Move came and went. The list goes on and on. The light gun just happens to be the most complete version of the entire story because it lasted long enough for the whole cycle to play out in plain sight. Show up as a marketing tool, get used, get left behind, blame the technology on the way out. What's telling too is that light gun games didn't die in the arcade. Big Buck Hunter is still a staple in bars and bowling alleys. Time Crisis was still getting new arcade releases well into the 2010s. Modern arcade chains still carry shooting cabinet experiences because they still work. The genre survived exactly where it always made sense. Short sessions, communal, physical hardware that turns playing into an event. The problem was never the genre. The home market just never had a real reason to commit to it. So the light gun didn't die because the screens changed. It died because it was never really built to survive. From the very beginning, and remember, Nintendo had been building this technology since 1973. The light gun on home consoles was a means to an end. A tool for getting hardware into stores, a way to move a software bundle, something useful, until it wasn't. Every time it looked like the genre might become something more than that, the support dried up before anyone realized it. The LCD transition just made that permanent, which means the real question was never why the light gun died. It's why, after 50 years, nobody ever really tried to save it. So enough of what I think. I'm interested to know what you think. What killed the light gun first, the LCD transition or the industry's lack of commitment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you made it this far, as always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming, my friends.